everyone, welcome to the Two Car Pros channel. My name is Ryan and today I'm going to show you exactly how to put on your intake manifold, valve covers, harmonic damper, and timing pointer for a small block Chevy. Before we go any further, let's thank our amazing sponsor, Summit Racing. Summit Racing has been with us for 5 engines now, and this build series wouldn't be happening without them. They have amazing customer support, incredible returns, and awesome selection. So make sure you get all of your speed parts from summitracing.com. We're really coming down to the end of this engine build, and I'm really excited to get it on the dyno, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that and find out exactly how much power this amazing engine's gonna make. With all that out of the way, let's jump in. Now, before we put the intake manifold on, we gotta remove our tape protecting provisions, and then we're gonna take a microfiber towel and some sort of cleaner. I'm using this solvent, spray it away from the engine onto the towel. And then we're going to clean especially where the water goes into the head, but just all around it's probably a good idea because there's oil and other things on here and dirt that we just don't want in our engine or anywhere near it. So that way our RTV will actually stick and create a nice seal for the water. So make sure this is nice and clean and this is nice and clean. Very cool. Go ahead and do that for both cylinder heads. Next, what we're gonna do is take our good old friend RTV and put a little bit on the end of our finger and just go around all of the water ports with RTV. There's 4 total, so 2 on each side. I'm just gonna show you how to do one. And you just wanna put a little skin of RTV on there. Doesn't have to be a big bead or anything. That is just fine, so do that for all 4 of those guys. And then for the front of their lifter valley, we're gonna lay down a bead of RTV all on this surface here. I've already made sure it's very clean with carburetor spray or solvent. And we're doing this because we don't want to use any kind of gasket. I've used coarse gaskets here before and they just spit out. So just lay a decent sized bead, kind of the full way around the front of your lifter valley. And it's okay if it squedges out a little bit, it's not the end of the world. Make sure you get the corners extra good, because they really like to seep out of the corners. And that looks pretty good. And then we're gonna do the same thing on the back of our lifter valley. Again, get the corners extra good. It should look just like that. And then we're going to go ahead and take our intake manifold gasket. Make sure you use the one that comes with your cylinder heads or one that is appropriately sized, because you can't have the gasket overlapping the airflow. So we're just going to place that down where it's going to be. You can use the holes to line it up like that. It's okay if the water interferes a little bit, not the end of the world. But make sure it is nice and lined up, and luckily the RTV is going to help us sort of hold it in place while we do our work, and that looks really nice. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side of the equation on the gasket. You can also do it on the intake manifold if you want to, but I've always found it easier just to do it on the gasket. Just like that. That looks very nice. And there we go. Make sure you don't disturb the gasket's movement or anything, and go ahead and do that for all 4 water holes. So go ahead and do this for both cylinder heads. So let's talk intake manifolds. I have this one sent over by Summit Racing. It is a dual plane stage 3 street strip manifold, so it's going to be very high performance. It has very big ports. It is a very cool unit and very affordable, so I've left a link for you down below in the description. Now, when you're plonking down an intake manifold, you want to line everything up and kind of hover above it like this, and then just come straight down, because you can't like moosh it around or anything. You just want to drop it like that, and then you're going to see the squish of the RTV out of the front and the back of the engine. Don't like try to wipe that off like cake icing or anything, just leave it how it is. And now we can go get our bolts. So something interesting about this intake manifold is that the bolts come with 2 size washers. You have a thin washer on this one, and you have a bit wider washer on this one. When you get your bolt kit, you'll see what I mean. The cool thing about this intake manifold is that it actually came with them. Not all of them do that. So what we're gonna do is put our bolts in. So you'll see like right here, there's not really enough clearance for the bigger washer ones. So you use the smaller washer, and I don't think every intake manifold is this way. but I think all the cool ones are. And I'm not going to put them down or anything, I'm just starting them. So one goes there. Another one definitely goes here. You can kind of see them if there's enough clearance for the wider washer. So it looks like there's 3 on this side and 1 on this side. So that's a thin one, that's a thin one, this is a thin one, this was a thin one. And the rest are normal size washers. And when you put your washers on, make sure that the beveled edge is facing up towards the head of the bolt. You should always do that if you have ARP fasteners like this. Most high performance aftermarket fasteners have a beveled edge on the washer, and that always needs to point up unless stated otherwise. And of course, I've left a link down below in the description to an ARP bolt kit, just in case you don't have one. You can also use the Summit Racing kit. So I'm just gonna wind these down with my fingers. They have basically 0 tension on them. So to get a better understanding of what I meant by the small washers versus the big ones, this is probably the best setup I can show you. So on the front of this water passage, there's enough room for a fatter washer, so one's used. Over here, there's not enough room. If you try to put that over here, you will interfere with this casting and it could potentially damage your intake manifold. So just kind of pay attention and look where, you know, there would be enough clearance for a fat washer and where there wouldn't be, and you'll be fine. So now we can torque down our intake manifold, but it requires a special sequence, and that sequence is right here. So just follow along and you'll do just fine. Our torque specification today is 25 foot-pounds, but we need to go in a sequence. We need to start at 10, then go to 15, and then finally 25, following that GM sequence. So torque wrench loaded up to 10 with a 3/8 socket. We can just start going. Here's number 1 to 10. Number 2's on the other side. Number 2 here is a little special. It actually requires a crow's foot socket to get a torque wrench on there. If you don't have a crow's foot, it's fine. Just use your best judgment. I would just use a wrench. There we go. And then number 3 is next door. 4 is on the other side. There we go. Here's 5 right here. 6 is right here. Okay, so it's not a total spiral. 7 is over here. There's 8. 9 is right here. 10 is right here. 11 is this guy. 12 is right here. And our first stage is done. Now I've set my torque wrench to 15 foot-pounds, and we just start the process over again. That's all you do. Okay, second sequence done. Now we can move up to 25 foot-pounds, and that's our final torque figure for this intake manifold. You might want to look this up and make sure that your intake manifold doesn't use a different torque specification. Iron intake manifolds and iron heads are going to use different torque specifications than aluminum setup like we have here, so you just want to double check that kind of a thing. And then work kind of quickly. I mean, you don't need to like really stress yourself out getting this done in a timely fashion. You just want to do it before the RTV set. It takes ours hours to set, so I've kind of given us a lot of leeway on that. Some people like to use fast setting RTV and they move, you know, really quickly. Luckily we don't have to do that, but I thought I'd mention it. So I'm at 25 foot-pounds. There we go. And don't go over 25 foot-pounds. You can really easily crack an aluminum intake manifold like you wouldn't believe, especially a cast one like this. You can crack it pretty easy, so be careful and don't go over 25 foot-pounds. You know, if you don't have a torque wrench or don't want to use a torque wrench or whatever, just go around a bunch of times between wrist tight and one arm tight and it should be okay, but you know, you want to be really careful. So we did number 1, now we're on to the final tightening of number 2. Number 3 is over here using my crow's foot. Not too bad. 3, 4 is this one. 5 is this one. 6 is this one. 7 is this one. And if you're using crow's foot, make sure it doesn't like interfere with the intake manifold, because it might give you a false tightness if the crow's foot itself is butting up against something on the intake manifold. 7, there you go. 8's right here. 9's this guy. 10's right here. 11. And then 12. So there you go, our intake manifold is properly installed. Now, before you go walking off, I would go ahead and retighten the bolts again to 25 foot-pounds. So just go around again, I won't make you watch it. That's just to kind of make sure that this thing is totally squished down correctly, because the gasket's gonna squedge out just a touch, and you wanna compensate for that. So I'm gonna go around again. Yeah, see, I got a little more out of that one. So I would at least go around one more time, maybe even 2 more times, just to double check that this is fully down, but do not go over that 25 foot-pound torque specification. And then before you walk off or do anything else, go ahead and tape up the intake manifold, just to kind of make sure nothing's gonna get in there and cause you problems. Especially if you're done working on it for the day. You just wanna make sure nothing can get down in there, and then also do it for where the distributor goes in. A lot of people forget that one. And that just ensures that nothing can get into the oil supply of the engine. You can go ahead and leave the water one open, it's fine. Now let's get our valve covers on. Before we do that, let's take some solvent and a microfiber. Spray on the microfiber, and then we're just gonna wipe this surface off because it has a bunch of oil on it from when we were installing our valve train. Let's go all the way around, just like that. Looking good. So now we're gonna put our fasteners in, and I'm using these studs. Link down below in the description. These are kind of an old school hot rod part, which I am really okay with because I think it's gonna look really neat on our old school Chevy. The trick to these is put a little bit of Loctite on the stud because we don't ever want this stud coming out when we take our fastener off in the future. So go ahead and do that. And then it has a little Phillips on the very top, and we're just gonna tighten that down. It just needs to be like wrist tight, and there you go. Go ahead and do that for all 4 fasteners. There's only 4 fasteners on small block Chevy. Very convenient. So now what we can do is put on our gasket, our cork gasket that came with our kit, just like that. You can get the upgraded steel insert ones if you feel so inclined, but these cork ones work just fine. And a hot rodder tip is to actually put contact cement here on this side so it sticks to your valve cover in case you need to take your valve covers back off. But since I have studs, I think it's going to get caught on the cork anyway, so I'm just going to leave them attached to the head because it can't, fall down or anything because the stud's in the way. And now I can finally reveal one of the parts of this project that I've been keeping under wraps, and that's the valve covers. Here they are. They say 383 stroker right on them. They're made by Proform, I believe, and the part number is down below in the description for your convenience. And just place it on your cylinder head. It's pretty easy. There's only 4 studs to line up, just like that. Wow, that looks really good. And for my actual fasteners, I have these. Those of you in the old school will remember these. These are really cool because you don't need any tools to install or remove them. I'm just gonna get them started, because obviously you can just use your fingers. And they look really old school hot rod. These are obviously reproduction, but I think they look really snazzy. And the basic idea is that you don't need the tools, like I said. If you had solid lifters, you have to take the valve cover off all the time to adjust lash. We don't have that problem, but I wanted the look and I think it's neat. So I'm just gonna go in an X pattern, tightening these down. There's usually not a torque spec for these. Something like 11 foot-pounds. It's not very tight. Just keep going in an X pattern until it feels good, about wrist tight. And there's only 4 fasteners, so that's kind of cool. And don't go crazy on this too, because you can just pull the threads right out of the aluminum, and then you'll be really sorry. So don't go nuts, it's fine. Look how snazzy that is. Now that is old school hot rod, I love it. The next thing we need to install is our positive crank ventilation valve. And we're gonna put this on the passenger side, so the valve cover I just installed. And before we do that, we need to put this grommet in there. And they can be a little tricky to get in, so what I've always found helpful is just use some WD-40 on it. And you could use engine oil just as easily. I've just used WD-40 and had really good results. And I'm just gonna clean it up. And the grommet actually came with our PCV valve, which was sent over by Summit Racing, and the link is located down below in the description. I've also WD-40 this as well, to make our time a little easier getting that in. There we go. Yeah, that looks really good. The next thing I'm gonna focus on is right here. This is where your fuel pump goes. We're gonna take some RTV and just apply it around the opening, because oil does go down here. You just wanna apply it to the inside, just the skin of our TV, really makes a difference. That looks really nice. Then we can take our gasket and place it on there. The RTV should hold it. Just make sure it's nice and lined up like this. And then we're gonna repeat ourselves with the skin of our TV. It doesn't have to be a whole heck of a lot. And I would do the RTV regardless if you're doing a block off plate or if you are doing an actual fuel pump. Although if you were doing a fuel pump, you should put your fuel pump push rod in now. Make sure it's nice and lubricated before you do that. But I am not putting a fuel pump in. Not a mechanical one at least. We are gonna go electric. So you can probably guess what's next after that. And then I have this really trick Summit block off plate, built aluminum. It's really nice. And the link is located down below in the description. I'm just gonna go ahead and get those bolts started. It comes with these Allen headed bolts that are a 5/16. And then the little guys are 3/16 Allen. So let's go ahead and snug these up. Going side to side as evenly as we can. If you don't want to torque spec them, I understand. It was difficult to even find the torque spec. Honestly, wrist height on this is probably perfectly fine just like that, but I did find a torque spec, so I'm going to use it. The top ones are 35 foot-pounds. And the bottom ones I'm going to put at 15 foot-pounds, because they are very little. There we go. So on our awesome timing over here, I noticed that there is no pointer. So I've gone ahead and removed these two bolts already. And I have this one made by Moroso that is adjustable, which is super cool. But I'm just gonna leave it on its stock setting because we're not doing anything too crazy. There we go. So I have my externally balanced dampener. You have to match your balance type to your crankshaft, and mine happens to be external, so you need to double check that. I've also put some lubricant on the outside of this shaft here, not the inside. You want to keep the inside nice and clean, and the reason I'm wearing a welding glove is because it's pretty hot. It's about 200 degrees. You don't want it so hot that it melts the seal, but hot enough so it expands a little bit, makes it a little easier to get on. So we can line up the Woodruff key. I have it pointing straight up, so it's easier to line up. Whew, toasty. So we're just gonna get it kind of started, sort of walking on there, and just hang on to it. So we can grab our crankshaft dampener installation tool, link down below in the description, fully built, and just start threading that in. A lot of people just use the bolt and just send it in. I don't like doing that. You can break the bolt off in the end of the crank snout, and then you're really in trouble. Winding that in, and then I put the spinning bit against the nut and then the stationary bit against the damper. That's the way I like to do it. And then what you're gonna do is grab a 1 1/4 inch wrench, put it on the big nut, hold the tool itself. You can even wind it in a little bit just to make sure that it is nice and tight in the end of the crank. It doesn't have to be Hulk tight or anything. And you just start spinning the big wrench around while you're holding the tool. And it's gonna load, it's gonna drag a little bit. It's totally normal. And that's just gonna push this on. So with the tool, it makes it really easy. I definitely recommend it. Also, you have to make sure that your pointer is the same clearance as your damper. Mine happens to be 8 inches, so I knew it was going to work just fine. But sometimes dampers are bigger or smaller, and the pointer has to accommodate for that. And don't hit the thing with a hammer, because you can destroy the thrust surface. It is basically at the end of its travel or exceedingly close. You'll feel it. It'll kind of go, 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 and then just stop. And it is completely stopped. The snout of the damper is completely wedged up against the crankshaft. So don't go any further. It's okay. So now we can remove our tool. And when you're loosening the tool, go on the outside threads, and that should get the little end out of the front of the crankshaft. Just like that. That is absolutely perfect. Now we can grab our bolt and send it the rest of the way home and torque to spec. So now we can put our damper bolt in. I have this one made by Summit Racing, and it is a high performance aftermarket bolt. It's a 5/8 12 point. I've already put grease underneath the washer and the shoulder of the bolt, and I have some Loctite on the threads. We can just go ahead and start that. And then it's gonna start butting up like that. We can grab our torque wrench, and our torque figure today for this is 80 foot-pounds, 80. So now with a helper holding the back of the engine with a big pry bar, you can actually see it right here in the shot moving a little bit. It's just holding bolts I have in the back of the crankshaft, and that's going to help me torque this down to 80 foot-pounds. There we go. 80's not crazy tight, honestly, and when you have a nice torque wrench, it makes it nice and easy. And the link is down below in the description to the bolt and my torque wrench. So I also wanted to mention that right here, you might have saw earlier that this was nearly touching this. You could get a piece of like notebook paper through it, but it really wasn't opened up enough to where I was comfortable. So I went ahead and modified this by cutting the shoulder out of it a little bit. So now I have plenty of clearance. So if you are running this pointer, it does need a little bit of modification if you're running this exact setup. Typically that's not the case, but hey, it's custom engine building. So that's how to put your valve covers, harmonic damper, intake manifold, pointer, and your fuel plate block off. Now, these are really small things that is easy to get wrong, so it's important to pay attention to make sure you do them correctly the first time so you're not doing them again at a later date. Also, like I mentioned earlier, make sure your damper, crankshaft, and flex plate or flywheel are all the same balance type. They all have to either be neutrally balanced, internally balanced, or externally balanced. Mine happens to be externally balanced, but yours might be different. That's something you really need to double check. Thank you so very much for watching. Thank you Summit Racing for sponsoring this series. If you found this video helpful or interesting at all, please consider becoming a member down below. It's a direct way to help and support the channel. Otherwise, a subscription, like, and a comment goes a really long way. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.